Today, we're celebrating the 100th episode of the Be Well by Kelly podcast, so I wanted to bring on a guest that I felt would be really impactful to your day-to-day. If you don't know about today's guest, she is known as the holistic psychologist. Dr. Nicole LePera found herself frustrated by the limitations of traditional psychotherapy. Wanting more for her patients and for herself, she began a journey to develop a united philosophy of mental, physical, and spiritual health that equips people with the interdisciplinary tools necessary to heal themselves. After experiencing the life-changing results herself, she began to share what she learned with others. Now she has shared her revolutionary approach through her book, How to Do the Work, Recognize Your Patterns, Heal from Your Past, and Create Yourself, which delivers self-healing practices and guidance to creating a more authentic and joyful life. It is a recent New York Times bestseller and offers readers the support and tools that will allow them to break free from destructive behaviors to reclaim and recreate their lives. Today's guest is so impactful to the millions of people that she supports online. I felt like it was the perfect way to celebrate the 100th episode. I hope you enjoy. Nicole, thank you so much for being here. I can't even begin to tell you how excited and scared and overwhelmed, I guess all the feelings I have had reading your book, How to Do the Work. It opened my eyes to all the ways that we really are a product of our childhood and our environment, but that there is such a light at the end of the tunnel to be a self-healer. So thank you so much for your work and for spending time with me today.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me, Kelly.
Well, let's dive right in. You talk a lot about holistic psychology and finding it. Can you tell me a little bit about your personal experience?
Absolutely. So as far as I can remember, I like to share my story going back in time because I'm one of those people who quite intuitively, I've always been really curious about other humans, particularly what made people different than me. Also, of course, what made people similar to me. So from that really place of curiosity, I think I was always marching to being a psychologist, if you will, when I grew up. On the human side of things, I'm also someone who has a lot of intimate knowledge of the experience of living with anxiety. For as long as I can remember, I was a very fearful child, afraid of health issues within my family, which were part of my early journey, afraid of bumps in the night, afraid of just bad things happening. So flash forward in time, a lot of training. I went to a whole lot of school to try to become the best psychologist that I could be to help other people gain insight into themselves and obviously create change in their lives. And several years in to what was quite a successful practice early on, I began to feel really disempowered. Not only in my own personal life, by this point, being on both sides of the couch, I had spent significant time in therapy myself. I continued to struggle to create change, to use my own tools to, stop or manage a bit better my own experience of anxiety. And I saw the same patterns in my clients week after week, month after month. With increasing amounts of insight, humans were beginning to feel more and more disempowered because what I saw quite universally is a global inability to create change, or like I say, to build the bridge from insight into maintained action. To mitigate our symptoms or create the life that we want. So from that very low point, and I go into it in more detail in my book, where I began to have my own, kind of dark night of the soul as I now understand it, which for me is, the accumulated results of living in a state of disconnection that I didn't even know I was living in. But I sought to understand first and foremost me and why I was struggling the way that I was. And through that journey of understanding, I unearthed a whole new vat of science and theory around holistic work and what we really are as humans and the interconnectedness mainly of our being, that we're all living in a body in this human existence. We all have energies or emotions. And I believe that there's an indescribable entity that makes each of us in our uniqueness, whether or not we want to call that a soul or something more spiritual or an essence, just what makes us. And what I began to understand is the reason why we're so stuck is because we're not working in that integrated way. I had been trained up until that point to be a doctor of the mind, really treating the mind separately from the body and again from the soul. So from that point forward, I began to speak and profess, really, when I went online, this model of holistic wellness that I knew quite intuitively the field needed to embrace, because like I said, we were universally stuck. When I began to share my story on Instagram, it was kind of affirmed because I started to hear from people all around the world now, attesting to that similar stuckness, and of course to their own ways that they were beginning to heal holistically, of course.
I love that. I feel like what you've unearthed in me through reading your book is that, we need to address if we are stuck. Like, how do we start to understand if we're stuck?
Yeah. So and a lot of us know, right? So even just hearing this idea of stuckness, some of us very much are maybe shaking our heads and saying, yes, I feel so stuck. I, feel disempowered. I don't feel like I have any control or choice in my life. And others might be a little bit more unclear on whether or not we're stuck. And though, like I said, the reason why a lot of us are stuck is because we're unconscious. We're living from that autopilot where we're not really showing up and making choices that might align with our new selves, ourselves as we age, ourselves as we mature. So many of us are relying on old habits and patterns that don't serve us. So the first part of exploration is discovering whether or not you are someone is stuck in your life out there, or is feeling satisfied, or is feeling connected. That's another word that comes up a lot. How connected are you feeling to your daily choices, to your daily decisions? Do you show up in more moments than not and make choices that are in alignment with where you want to see yourself going in life? Or are you relying on something else and you continuously find yourself cycling, as many of us do, in older choices and older responses and in patterns that no longer serve us? So beautiful question, which is explore for ourselves. You'll always hear me professing and suggesting and urging those who listen to my work not to just take my word for it, to go and learn how to be an observer of yourself in life and beginning to explore whether or not your very patterned way of being, because that's, I think, the first thing we're met with, how habitual we are, how we tend to do the same things day in and day out, how we tend to think the same things and feel the same ways. So my suggestion always is to begin with your own life and look at your day to day. And again, ask yourself, how active of a participant do you feel? Do you feel like you're empowered, you're showing up, and again, you're making choices that serve you? Or are you like the larger majority of us, feeling like choices are made for you, feeling like you're maybe really reactive, and or feeling just not connected to life in general?
Yeah, in reading your book, you talk about not feeling connected and sort of maybe it was like disassociation and having a hard time remembering things. Um, it made me question like how connected and how present I was in my own life. And not only was I conscious, or was I conscious, and also was I really experiencing the joy of
Mm-hmm.
presence? Can you talk about what it means to be conscious and how we might rewire our brain for that consciousness and change?
I love how you're bringing up, joy here, Kelly, because feelings for many of us are a marker of how present we are. And a lot of us, as kind of crazy as this might sound, we don't feel our feelings, or we become stuck in one feeling. So for me, my one feeling that I cycled throughout, that again was evidenced in the story I even shared earlier, was anxiety, was stress. I had a very intimate, consistent relationship with that. Though, where was anger? Where was sadness? Where was joy? And again, what I came to the awareness of when I began to witness my emotional world was that was absent, that I wasn't really feeling all of the range of human emotion. And anytime we, again, are recycling through the same emotion, or maybe we just don't feel connected to our emotions, then chances are we might not be as consciously present. Now, I like to explain why a bit. The reason why we're not present typically originated at a time, typically in our earliest experiences, where there was something that was felt to be overwhelming, was felt to be too much. Maybe we didn't feel like we had, emotionally available or attuned caregivers around us to help us make sense of what was going on with our emotions at that time, as I know I did not feel I had. So we did as we always do, we adapted. We found the best, safest way for us to continue to move forward despite having that lack of support. So what many of us do is we do fall into different states, different degrees of dissociation or disconnection out of protection. And I always explain the physiology, which is often originating in an evolutionary drive, because there are explanations. However, I know what our human mind does. We tend to apply all other narratives to why we can't change, usually some version of I'm broken or I'm unworthy. of the change that I want for myself, or perhaps that I see other people having. Maybe I don't even feel that I could want that for myself. So again, there's a reason why we're stuck. There's a reason why we adapt it the way we did, though a lot of us are living continuously now in that state of disconnection. That's driven by our nervous system, which is why, again, I emphasize the importance of working with the human body. Here's the moment where no amount of positive thought, right, no amount of affirmation, I've tried it. I've tried to tell myself and will myself to be a peaceful being, receptive to joy and all of the beautiful other emotions that I knew I wasn't experiencing. And my body wasn't having it. I was still so stuck in my nervous system state of activation. So this is why it's so incredibly important. This is why for so many of us, mantras, affirmations don't work, because we actually have to employ our body. We have to teach our body how to down-regulate, how to embrace safety. For our nervous system, safety is such an incredible, critical component, originating again at a time where we didn't feel safe. So we adapt it. So memories, I talk about memories a lot in my work, because one of the first thing I noticed about myself quite early on, when I began to hear my friends sharing childhood stories about holidays and what it was like for them, in their childhood with their siblings maybe. And I had a big blank, Kelly. I had no idea. And again, for a very long time, I entertained that the possibility that maybe something was wrong, likely in my brain. Maybe my memory system was damaged. Maybe I didn't have, a chip or a neurotransmitter that I made all of these, created all of these narratives with why I couldn't remember.
Get your genes tested.
Seriously, maybe it's early onset Alzheimer's. I even, if I'm honest, I found real quick story. I found a clinician, a psychologist in the UK that was studying some form of memory, something. And I applied for a research study because I was convinced that I had that, genetic apparition. I didn't even know what it was that she was studying, but the symptoms sounded like what I experienced. And I thought maybe that I would be a participant in this study because anyway, long story short, the reason why we don't remember for many of us is because we're not connected. We're not connected in our physical bodies. Our nervous system doesn't feel safe to relax into the present moment, allowing us to have and receive all of the feelings present. So there is no memory to go back to. Now, again, a lot of us have a lot of different symptoms that come when we feel unsafe at one time. But our goal in adulthood is to identify what are the old ways that we're operating, honoring compassionately that many of these ways were developed, were adaptations at our best attempts at keeping ourselves safe. However, they're not always serving us. And for a lot of us, that means we have to learn how to drop into our bodies and actually teach our bodies a new experience.
I love it. What are some ways that you talk about in your book and what you've used with clients to dysregulate or downregulate and like drop into our bodies? Because I love even just the visualization of that. Just it feels calm, like the dropping.
And I use that word very intentionally. I'm happy you like it, Kelly, because I often very fondly refer to where I used to go, because for me, it was often an indescribable place. Yes, there were times where I knew I was, rehashing an argument that morning, or I was worrying about a future time. I knew where my mind was or where my attention was. It was in my mind, again, with these racing thoughts. There's a large majority of times though, Kelly, where I didn't know where I was at. So I've termed it now very endearingly, my spaceship. So dropping in quite literally is a visual, right? Where I was somewhere else. I couldn't even really describe it. I just knew that if there was a television show on, I probably wasn't paying attention to it. If there was a human in front of me, I might have been going through the motions of relating to them, though I wasn't really in my body experiencing them and receiving them. So dropping in is such a beautiful, I think, way to visualize it. The first way, the first how, the first practical of how to drop in will always be building a foundational basis of conscious awareness, learning how to be in our conscious self. The way we can do that is we can begin to train, I call it a muscle, of attention, because most of us have very, very wimpy muscles. We allow our attention to be grabbed by external things happening in our world that we become preoccupied, and or the larger majority of us, I think, get preoccupied internally. Maybe we don't even know where, we're just somewhere else. We, however, have choice in where we put our attention, and to become present to that physical body that I keep referencing, we can use actions of our physical body, such as our breath, the ever-present breath that's always there. We can begin to, as I say, hook our attention. So you might not know where or what you're paying attention to, and maybe you do. You're rehearsing that, you're rehashing the argument you had with your partner that morning. in that moment, if we can make the choice to unhook our attention from those probably unhelpful thoughts and put it on our breath. Another equal, so experimenting with whether or not the breath feels like an easier hook, because it's a process, it's a new practice, or some others have more success with our senses. If you're a very sensory being, as some of us are, if there's anything we can smell, touch, if we're tasting, if we're eating something in the given moment, can we hook our attention on our senses? And when we're doing either of those two practices consistently, we're giving ourselves the opportunity to be embodied, as we say, to be in our body, experiencing the sensory experience of being in a body, and or the breath. Our breath is particularly helpful, of course. So if we want to build on that foundation now, some version of nervous system regulation, our breath also happens to give us the opportunity to do that. Through intentional breath, we can activate our nervous system, send ourselves into, right, stimulation, or we can calm our nervous system. And so many of us need to cultivate that more calming breath. So for me, that meant downshifting from constant fight or flight into that zone of safety through that longer exhalation, through that calming breath. So becoming conscious means becoming embodied. Use your body, use your breath, use your senses. And then if you dropped into a body that you can tell is in some state of nervous system dysregulation, likely because your heart is racing, you're waiting for the next shoe to drop, then we can begin to get really intentional and use our breath to cultivate safety and regulation in our nervous system.
I love it. You talked about in your book how Lolly got you moving your body, and that was like the catalyst into being in your body and using your breath and having all these other modalities, whether it's meditation or to really feel conscious. And that resonates with me so deeply because I feel like a Labrador, and my husband and I talk about that. We need to run to be able to chill in our body and like just be on the ground and be that like happy go lucky, like true childhood self that we are. And it's amazing to me because psychology, like traditional psychology, I am picturing a person sitting in a chair, you're on the couch, and they're like, well, if you want to work out and you want to eat healthy, then you got to just do it. And it's like, but there are so many things blocking us from that. And you do such a good job. Like, I could quote your entire book. It's so beautiful. And I think that breath and that consciousness is just, it's obviously so important. And it allows us to kind of understand, well, what's keeping us from consciousness. And you talk a lot about the things that do that, from our childhood traumas to, our self-beliefs. Can we dive into the things that keep us from our consciousness and keep us in our brain ruminating with ourselves?
Yeah. And just going back to Lolly, because this leads us right in. I'll be the first to admit I wanted to knock her out when she first started to suggest that I move my body. And this is coming from someone who I played softball up through college. I was a Division I athlete. So I've moved my body. I have a history of moving my body. I never particularly liked it. However, so this isn't someone who was like, yeah, moving, great, a new workout regimen, awesome, sign me up. Absolutely not. And here's the reason why. And this is going to go into the answer of this question. We don't actually like to change as humans. We become very settled in those habits and patterns that I keep referencing. Again, driven from our evolution, we are protected when we're in those familiar patterns because our subconscious prefers that to the uncertainty of what comes next, of not knowing. So what happens is everything that many of us have we began to practice repeating since childhood. For many of us, that means our daily habits and patterns. Just how do we care for our body? What does our self-care look like in any given day? Dropping a little bit deeper, that embodies our mental world too. What are the repetitive stories we tell ourselves that then equal or lead to the same very patterned feelings that then we're stuck in? All of that becomes our familiar. So even if though logically, as many of us have now, years, decades accumulated, right, of all of the evidence of how these patterns no longer serve us, we might even have those well-meaning loved ones in our life, reminding us how these things don't serve us anymore. Yet, according to our subconscious, those things are preferable because we know what comes next. We've lived those consequences and we know that we can navigate and tolerate them, even though they are probably increasingly uncomfortable, those consequences. Our subconscious is wired to keep us in that familiar. So back to me trying to create now a new habit of working out after not having done it, of moving my body. It was unfamiliar. I didn't want to tune into what my body was doing. A lot of us, again, those adaptations were our best attempted effort at keeping us away from discomfort that at one time was too overwhelming. So for me, that likely meant all of the other feelings that I was having as a very young child that felt too unsafe to have. So as I began to create conscious awareness and drop into my body, now as many of us do, I was met with everything that had accumulated there over time, all of the discomfort, all of the dysregulation, everything that was stored in me and never actually released. That's really uncomfortable. So now not only is the unfamiliar going to challenge us, going to contribute to what I call resistance, all of the thoughts of why we shouldn't do these new things and how life is really just okay as it is, all of the feelings of discomfort that come along with doing something new, right? Now, before I know it, I want to go right back into those familiar patterns. However, right, to create change, as we know, we have to begin to do new things, like you're saying. A large reason why my clients weren't getting better is because that bridge of action was difficult. Each and every time they tried to make a new choice in that moment, that resistance would come up, giving them evidence of to not continue to go in that direction. Before we knew it, I'm settled into those unfamiliar patterns. So building that conscious awareness, anticipating that change will be difficult. For me, that meant learning how to drop into my body, learning how to be present to the energies that were in there, and learning a new way to release them. Because what I came to realize for me, I'm like you, a Labrador. If I don't move, if I don't physically release my energy more consistently than not, that's not to say that every day I do something active, though I do set an intention to be active in one way or another every day, because what I've came to find is that when I release my body's energy in that way, I do feel better. My mind feels clearer. I feel more connected to myself and more present to the world around me.
It's so true. It's so true. And I think what's scary with the unfamiliar is exactly what you're talking about. You're unearthing stuff that you've repressed.
Yes.
And what was so profound in the book is that these traumas do not have to be these massive, hard experiences, though some people have those, and those are so hard for people to deal with. But we can't also like diminish that these small traumas over and over again, whether they're parent trauma that I'd love to go deeper into this, but these small repetitive traumas are actually trauma too, and we need to broaden what it means to have trauma. Can we talk about trauma and broadening the scope of trauma and what we might have experienced in our childhood that we kind of walk around with today?
For a very long time, Kelly, we used to define trauma based on the event, right? It was a function of the event. If the event surpassed a certain threshold, we would label it as trauma. This, again, was a really big point of confusion for me. It took us up until the 90s, I believe, when the ACEs scale, listeners might be familiar, Adverse Childhood Experiences Assessment Scale, was developed in the 90s. And at that point in the field, we had now scientific evidence to document that events in childhood that were deemed as traumatic carry effects with us into later life. Physical effects, where we can increase the prevalence of certain medical diagnoses, and psychological or emotional effects. So this was the first time that we kind of had evidence that our childhood impacts us later in life. It's shocking that it took us until the 90s to kind of document this, though ever grateful that at least we got on the board and said, okay, yes, childhood can continue to affect us. However, in my opinion, it was still quite incomplete because, of course, I took the ACEs scale and I scored a 1 out of, I think it's a 10-point maximum, which is quite low. I think upwards of 60% of the population scores around a 1. I worked, however, in many different treatment contexts with people who scored upwards of a 10. And yet what I continued to see is evidence of the same coping mechanisms, the same habits and patterns in all of us, regardless of if you were on the high end of that scale or of the low end. So at first, again, this was another point of shame and confusion and concern. Why am I dissociating? Why am I showing, evidence that something bad happened to me? And if I'm honest, I did try to recollect what that bad thing would be. I kind of while I have very limited memory, I tried to explore, could I have had some abuse or extreme neglect that I'm not aware of? And I blocked out, as I know, right, that we sometimes do. And my soul kept pinging, no, that's not what is happening here. So what I began to understand, and my hope, is that we remove that label from the event, because there are a lot of us that are falling into this category and that are quite confused with why we're struggling in these very great ways, because we quote unquote don't have the reason. Nothing bad happened to us. What is wrong with us? So I believe that, and I hope that we begin to apply, the label of trauma to the perception of the event, to the experience of the event, honoring that there are many of us that didn't feel like we had the supports. And when these consistent moments happened where we felt like we had to repress parts of ourself, our emotions, that it can result in those same adaptations, those same problematic habits and patterns that no longer serve us and that continue actually to keep us disconnected from the self, which I believe is a trauma in and of itself. Not being connected to that space within, right, is problematic, is troubling. So in the book, I talk about expanded definition of trauma. Again, the hope that we begin to apply it to the experiences, how it was received, experienced by us, perceived. And that allows us to allow in those more consistent moments, again, where I feel like I had to repress my needs in any of those areas, my physical, my emotional, my spiritual needs, and I had to continue to show up as a part of self, or as a, masquerade of self, resulting in the same adaptations and the same consequences of having the big bad things that we so historically always defined as trauma.
That was so interesting, because just you, in your explanation of the archetypes of childhood trauma, I could so easily see how, as a new mom, or how my parents or my friends' parents would all fall under these archetypes. Can we kind of talk about some of the archetypes that are traumatic to children? Because I think it's important. I have so many female like parents and moms who listen to this show. Like, I want them to kind of be open to what might be traumatic for their child, because we all just want to do our best, and we don't want to cause trauma for our children. But I mean, there are so many that could just be like, oh yeah, that was my mom's friend and that's my mom. And they're just normal behaviors, but we need to break these patterns for our children.
Yeah. And a lot of times I want to acknowledge, Kelly, for all the other moms listening out there, a lot of times these are born out of very well intention. For many parents, out of your own past lived experience of pain, right, that came along with whatever it was or wasn't for you in life. And oftentimes this is a best attempt, or so we hope, at shielding our children from that same experience that we've had. So you'll always hear me, because I do get asked a lot different versions of questions around parenting. And you'll always hear me, answer very compassionately and urging parents to be very compassionate with themselves, because we are humans, right, that are limited by everything that we were taught and everything that we were modeled by those that came before us. And we are very well intentioned quite often, especially when it comes to parenting. Though oftentimes, like I said, we're not operating based on the uniqueness of perhaps our child. And that's an incredibly difficult thing to do. Parenting is a tall order to begin with, because to be a successful parent, right, we have to be a self-contained human, meaning aware of our own physical, spiritual, and emotional needs, able to, navigate and meet our needs or ask for help in the moments where we need help, so that we can then show up in service of attending to another human, attuning to their needs, who might be drastically different than our needs. And this is where it gets complicated. A lot of us can't imagine, and I can't fully resonate with what it is to be a parent, because I'm not one, though I can imagine seeing a little human that I created. We probably do imagine a lot of similarity. Oh, they're just like me, so they must feel sadness the way I do, and, cope with sadness in the same way. And that's just not true. We're all raising unique little individuals, and it's very difficult for us to do that. So to be a fulfilled human and then to attend to another human is a very, very, very tall order. So parenting is challenging, I think, is the major takeaway for this, and being compassionate with ourselves as a parent. My answer to any parenting question, where typically the version of the question is, how do I break the pattern in my child, give them an experience so that they don't have to have the pain I have, do differently for my kid, My answer is always some version of the same, which is working on self-healing, showing up for yourself, right? Creating for many of us new habits and patterns that better serve you as a human. Because what I do know about childhood and about kids in general, they are so much more impacted by what they see than what they're told. We all have little neurons actually in our brain. They're called mirror neurons. They light up when we witness other people in the world being about their world, doing things for them. Our brain lights up as if we're doing it, or it's a form of mental rehearsal where we are actually, again, being impacted far, far more greatly by what we're seeing around us. So again, very well intentionally, so many of us parents want to say the right thing, right? Do the right thing, like in action, or teach Johnny or Janet or whomever, right, what to do differently than maybe what we're doing, behind closed doors. However, what is so much more impactful is, what are we doing? What are we showing Johnny or Janet? How is Johnny or Janet experiencing us in relationship? Are we creating change? Because like I said, that's going to be far more impactful than saying or doing the right thing.
It's so true. After just reading that chapter, it became so clear that it wasn't about how I was parenting. It was about how I was taking care of myself and the work that I was doing. If I'm not going to do this work for myself, if I want to be a parent, I should at least do it for my children.
Yes. And I bring this up in the context of the archetype conversation, because a lot of us do have beliefs, around showing up in service of others. We become the caretaker. We believe that putting someone else's needs, especially as a parent, is selfless, is how we should show up, especially when we have little ones around us now that very much need us in any way. However, the cliche, we can't pour from an empty cup, is very real. Because what happens even with children, if our needs are consistently unmet, we actually become resentful of the world around us, the people around us. We don't actually look in the mirror and say, okay, well, Nicole, how have you not been, creating space for your needs? How have you not been showing up in service of yourself? We actually look at everyone else, even our children possibly, and become resentful of everything we've given over time, not realizing that we have to be the first person to show up and meet our own needs. So being a caretaker is a big archetype that I think comes up and is activated a lot in parenthood. This idea that it is selfish to put the self, the needs of the parent first. And again, I don't believe that to be true. I think if we continue to show up fully in service of others, we create problematic dynamics in our relationships overall.
Definitely. How do you, when you're working with your clients and all the self-healers out there, how do you suggest we preserve our own self, and so that we are preventing resentment and protecting ourselves, not protecting ourselves, but like really being true to ourselves? And how, because so many times I think in today's day and age, that looks like selfish.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We become intimately aware of the self first. I don't think many of us, even as adults, really know who we are, what we want, what our feelings are. I don't think we're really intimately connected. I don't think many of us have a relationship with ourselves. I think we are more consistently attempting to meet our needs through other people and through our relationships and through the roles that we play, as opposed to really just knowing what our true needs are in any given moment, separate from the world around us. And again, this doesn't mean that we don't access the world around us and the supports around us. Absolutely. But I think a lot of us are just going over that one step of self-awareness of, what are my needs? I know I had a really pivotal moment. I think I might've even shared it in the book, where I came to really the beginnings of a realization of how much I was overstepping me in most of my equations in general life. And the moment was when I was looking to a friend actually for advice around, all of the differing obligations that I felt I was being pulled in all the different directions of all of the relationships in my life, right? Family who wanted me to do one thing, a partner at the time who wanted me to do another, everyone else who I felt wanted things of me. So I was looking to this one particular friend for advice, and I was listing everything everyone else wanted of me for whatever the engagement or the day or that was. And she very calmly looked at me after patiently listening to me telling her what everyone else wanted. And she looked at me and said, Nicole, well, what do you want to do, for whatever the day was or the moment was in time? And I mean, Kelly, I was dumbfounded. I had no idea. I had never asked myself. And that really highlighted for me, wow, I almost fell off the couch. I thought, damn, Nicole, I don't know if you've ever, it took your friend here saying, what do you want? I don't even think I stopped to say, what do I want? I just got so used to habitually worrying about what everyone else would want or would need, that I never actually stopped to say. And this was, again, after I did some self-exploration and witnessed myself throughout life. I saw that for me was a very, very global pattern. I did not know what I wanted. And I think a lot of us as adults don't know. And that can be a scary place. It can feel very vulnerable to even admit, I don't know what my needs are. I don't know how my body feels. I don't know what amount of sleep it needs or what nutrients it feels the best on. We could not know. From that place of not knowing, of course, that place of curiosity for many of us becomes the foundation, though, of knowing, of reconnecting to all aspects of the self, like we've been talking about. It is a process, right? This isn't the light switch where I'm like, oh, right now I can just know. It's engaging with the process of reconnecting with the physical, the emotional, and the spiritual self so that we can find our way into knowing. Because something else I do know, how many times can I say the word know? Know to be true, is that we all have an inner knowing. We all have an intuition. We all have a space that's deeper, that's within ourselves that knows. So many of us have to break the habit of looking outside first, give ourselves the time and the space to then reconnect and discover, and then begin to trust what that inner place is saying.
I love that. You said in the book that it's a daily practice and we can't look out and we have to look in. Nowadays, people all want a quick fix. I mean, There are people doing ayahuasca and trying to like connect to this inner person and get it all figured out in one 6-hour period. Can you talk about what the work actually looks like daily to connect and kind of get to know yourself and to know what you want? Because I guess in my practice, I have a lot of clients who come to me for food, right? And we talk about nutrition and they want to know exactly what they should eat and if they should intermittent fast and if they should drink their coffee with creamer, does that break their fast? Are they balancing their blood sugars? Should they be vegan, vegetarian, paleo? Should they try carnivore? Like, I mean, it's a lot of asking me for the advice. And a lot of times, it's paired with physical ailments and what I've come to learn in a decade that is they need to feel empowered and they need to do it on their own and they need to discover this stuff on their own because then they own it.
Yeah.
How do you think that people should do this work?
Yeah, I'm smiling because I can imagine the differing questions that you get, around. And I get the same version where people looking to me. I talk a lot about what works for me, my own healing journey, though you'll always hear me follow up when I'm sharing my suggestions with that, kind of urging that one explores for themselves, right? What works for you? Because we do all have that inner knowing. Many of us don't kind of turn within though to see, even for things like nutrition. That might mean becoming, as all things, built. The foundation of consciousness is the most integral piece of that, connecting to our body so that we can tune in and become a conscious consumer. I talk about conscious consumption in all respects. Conscious consuming, being aware of how does the food make me feel when I eat it? Do I even know? Let's back up a minute. Do I know when my body is hungry? Do I know what that signal is versus all of the million other reasons why many of us eat, right? We might not even know the differing in the signals of our body. Do I know what it feels like to be in a rested body? Do I know how much sleep, therefore, I need? Possibly the answer is no. So through, again, cultivating a consciousness practice, that practice we talked about earlier, tuning into my breath or my sensations, doing it not just once a day, right? Learning how to consciously be aware, consistently, I should say, be aware of how conscious or unconscious we are, toning that muscle so that I can more and more often live from that conscious awareness for some of us so that I can consciously continue to tune in to my body so I can attune to it. That might take some exploration then, trying different nutritional components, trying different times of eating or not eating. I'll share my own nutritional journey. I experimented with all of it. I pulled back everything. I did an elimination diet. Knowing that I personally had some inflammation. And then I tried all of the iterations of eating to see how my body responded. responded. My goal for all of us is to find that empowerment. I love that you use that word, within, because something else I know about being a human, a reality that I think a lot of us are very uncomfortable with to some degree. We are ever changing. We are transient. We are evolutionary creatures, right? Our needs likely, if things are going well, will shift and change as we age, as we mature, as we develop. Our perceptions of the world will change. Our beliefs might even change. So we want to be consciously attuned to ourselves as we're ever changing. So even if we came up with a protocol that for me, say, worked now when I'm 38 years old, I don't know if that exact protocol will fit the needs of my, say, 48 or 68-year-old body. I might have to amend things a bit, right? As my hormones change, as my energy levels change, as my beliefs about my body change, I might have to change what I do. So my goal, and the goal of self-healing, the goal of this book, is to find that empowerment within and to begin to trust that I can walk into the unknown that is tomorrow, that is unknown for all of us, and confidently navigate what comes, whether or not that's the changing needs of my physical body, my emotional body, or my spiritual self. And until we find that from within, so many of us are going to be looking outside of ourselves, applying what worked for someone else to us, and we might be missing the mark.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. And it is trial and error, but it is without having a connection to yourself and being present in how you feel and being conscious, you're really just doing what other people are doing without it actually feeling that in that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way I apply that, just to use nutrition to go off that today, in my general day to day, is making it a habit of asking my body what it wants for any given meal, right? Tuning in, like imagining, like, okay, if I put a salad in front of me, do you light up, body? Is that something that's attractive to you in this moment? Or do you want a big hunk of meat? Or do you want some fish over here? I actually break it down into that moment. And this is from someone who, I come from a family. The week's dinners were planned weeks in advance. I knew that Tuesday we were having roast beef, Wednesday we were having chicken parmesan, right? So did my body want roast beef on Tuesday? Didn't matter, right? Because that's what we were having. So I had to break a lot of my habits and patterns around food and what I ate, and all of the decisions I was basing on what my meals would be that weren't coming from what my body wants. So for me, I just wanted to use that example. I break it down into a moment by moment basis. When I feel that ping of I'm getting hungry, I now try to make a conscious effort to ask myself what I want, right? And what I have available, and can I meet that need in that moment for what my body really is desiring.
I love that. And you said you made a conscious effort, which I think is, you use language so well in the book to just describe what we need to be thinking about and how we need to be connecting with ourselves. Conscious effort is so different than so many people who are almost burying themselves in their food choices.
Yes.
And you had an example in the book that someone ate a tray of brownies and they didn't even realize that they were doing it. So often we're disconnected from what the reality is and how we'd want to treat ourselves if we were in a conscious state. So how can someone connect to that visualization that you're talking about? You talk about future self-journaling. Can you explain that practice and how someone might use that to manifest their life and get what they want?
So future self journaling is a practice that I actually created quite early on my journey, where I was really aware by that point of how powerful our subconscious was. What I became aware of, Kelly, is that if I woke up each and every day, in normal life, just opened my eyes as I did every day, chances are, unless I began to become conscious and set a new intention, chances are my day would go the same as the day before. I would do the same habits and patterns. I really wouldn't make any changes, because what I began to realize again by then was how powerful this autopilot is. I threw even some science, on top of this. Our brain actually wants to coast in that autopilot. It conserves calories. Our brain is already the organ that needs the most of our caloric intake. So we actually desire to be coasting on our autopilot from a caloric standpoint, as well as from a familiarity standpoint, right? So what I began to become aware of is I needed a bit of help. I needed to be able to set new intentions to create change. And now I was not a journaler. I was not someone who had a journaling practice really anywhere in my life. So for me, using a practice of journaling was a new, and I began to experiment. How can I harness something that can be made consistent, like a journaling practice, into a practice that will help me create change? And what I came up with, and I have prompts, so anyone who is interested in grabbing these can sign up for my email list on my website, The Holistic Psychologist. They'll get sent your way. I actually just put out an edited version, an updated version within the past 6 months. But essentially what it is the action of each and every day, setting an intention to make a new choice that we will attempt to make consistently for a foreseeable future. Again, whether or not you want to read people who say a habit takes 60 days or et cetera, we want to make this consistent decision more often than not. So through the act of every day setting that intention to create change, we actually are setting ourselves up to succeed for a couple reasons. One, the act of setting an intention is already my first step into the conscious mind. Out of that autopilot, increasing the likelihood, right, that I keep that promise later in my day. I'm already snapped out of my autopilot. Also, kind of harnessing a little bit of neuroscience, our brain doesn't know the difference between what's real and what we're imagining to be real in that second. So if while I'm writing my journal, which takes me a couple minutes, I suggest that you write in the present tense as if you've already kept that promise. So I'll just use the consciousness example, right? We might set a daily intention. I am conscious. What that means to me is I will check in with myself throughout my day and, right, hook my attention to my breath, say, as if I've already done it. When I'm writing as if it's already done, I am a conscious being. I've hooked my attention on my breath and I'm embodied, or whatever the language is. My brain in that moment is firing as if it's true. So now I'm already laying down some new neuronal networks, in a sense, some new neurons, right? That the more I fire those together, the more they will wire together, creating a new habit pattern. And that's already happened just in the act of writing it. Now, of course, the caveat here is it's not a magic journal. When I close that journal, right, the goal would be to practice that intention at a later time. Having reminded ourselves, though, like I said, might mean I need an extra reminder. Maybe I do set an alarm on my phone, as I suggest us to do, for an hour or two in the day where it will go off and I can, again, snap myself from that autopilot and remember to practice this new tool. For me, the journaling, doing that daily, I still do it daily. I did it this morning. I've changed now the habits and patterns that I'm working on. I've built foundations and I've continued to evolve my practice, though I do it to this day. Because to this day, I still understand that I still have an autopilot. It looks different than my old autopilot, right? Though it's still there to some extent. So being conscious is still an ever-present part of my journey. I still utilize the Future Self Journal prompts. Again, anyone who's interested can jump on my website, on my email list, and get those. And you can really tailor it to whatever it is that you're working toward, knowing that by setting a new intention, you're increasing the likelihood that you begin to make a new choice. And again, that's what the work's about. That's why it is titled How to Do the Work, because we do have to build that bridge from insight. We have to take that intention and translate it now into a daily consistent action to actually create and maintain that change.
I love it. It's not about a 6-hour ayahuasca trip. It is not about just thinking that you're going to do something. It's how are we taking these intentions that we have and actually manifesting in our life and creating real tangible change that makes us level up.
Yeah.
Really.
And the ayahuasca trip for many of us, Kelly, can be, the catalyst, can be the portal, can be that one moment where we did experience a new state of consciousness. Though, and like I mentioned in the book, my question always remains, well, what do you go back and return to? And more often than not, the answer is maybe I'm different for a little bit, right? Maybe I maintain some of the consciousness or the changes that I experienced in that ayahuasca trip. Though more often than not, most of us slide back very gradually into that autopilot. So not to say that these experiences can't be transformative. For many of us, they are the portal to then beginning the work, the journey of healing, though more often than not, they're never the one all be all. We do go back to a life that for many of us, it is very difficult to continue these new habits and patterns in. Again, the pull then toward the familiar becomes stronger. And before we know it, we're maybe a week out, maybe 6 months out, and we're back in the older patterns. And we haven't really maintained then the shifts that might have occurred in those transformative experiences.
Right. We need to address the trauma. We need to unearth the uncomfortable. We need to get in there and do the work. One of the ways you talk about doing the work is inner child work. Can you talk about what it is, what it means to meet your inner child and to take care of that human?
We all have an inner child. And there are still parts of me when I think about inner child work, when I attempt to engage with my inner child. If I'm honest, Kelly, I cringe a little bit. It's vulnerable. It's uncomfortable. When some people meet this concept or this work, they want to shut the book and say, what the hell is this? I'm an adult now. Let's leave that in our past. Though I think everything you and I have been talking about here this morning is really evidence, even the subtitle of my book, right? Recognize your patterns, heal from your past. I think we're all becoming clear that we don't actually leave that past. The past does come with us in the habits and patterns that we're living. So what inner child work really means is acknowledging how the past continues with us, how for many of us, we're still repeating maybe self-care habits and patterns that don't serve our physical bodies. For others, maybe, our inner child is again, our inner child, just to be clear, lives in our subconscious. And maybe for some of us, it still contains suppressed or repressed emotions that at one point we were shamed or we felt shame around or didn't feel we're worthy to express. So each and every time now in adulthood, we continue to repress or suppress those, not expressing our full self in that way. For others of us, we are so disconnected from that pure spirit-like entity that I believe is present from childhood. We look at children we can learn so much from. So many children are still in that connected to their pure essence, still being who they are in the world, regardless of what the world says. Unfortunately, many of us, by the time we reach adulthood, we've amended ourselves, we've compromised, we don't self-express in that very pure way. So again, we're carrying the wounds of that self. So in our adulthood, it's just becoming aware. What are the habits? What are the patterns that we've carried with us that might not be fully serving our authentic self-expression? And then in the areas where we can begin to better honor our needs, physically, emotionally, or spiritually, we begin our own individualized process of reparenting, which is, again, we can even utilize future self journaling to each and every day, set an intention to create a new habit in one of those areas where now as an adult, I can honor the needs of my inner child and work maybe through some, trial and error, like we talked about first, to explore how I could better meet those needs. And I'll be the first to share, especially when it came to my emotional world, when I docked my spaceship, when I came into my body, Kelly, after being in school for innumerable years and learning all about the emotional worlds of others, I had no idea what would work for me. I had no idea how to take care of myself when I had feelings. Some feelings I were having were new to me because, again, all I really knew was stress or not stress. When I, started to dive into sadness, into grief, into anger, it was a foreign world and it was uncomfortable. So a lot of us, when we begin to reparent, especially our emotional selves in adulthood, we might need to explore, we might need to, experiment and see how we can best soothe ourselves or feel better and or utilize our relationships in a new way to gain the support that we need.
I love that. Let's dive into relationships a little bit. You talk about trauma bonds in your book. Can you explain what a trauma bond is and how to identify if you're in one?
Trauma bonds are the relational patterns that, yep, you've guessed it, many of us repeat from childhood. We learn, and again, I'm going to simplify things as I often do. We learn how to be in relationship with other people based on how we were first in relationships with typically our core caregivers around us, right? The roles we play, those adaptations, everything that we've been talking about, the archetypes, the masks we wear, becoming the helper, becoming the overachiever, the caretaker that we were talking about earlier, all of that patterning, in my belief, originated very early on. And it became patterned. What we did in our first earliest relationships that I should mention, we need it. When we are children in infancy as a human, we need relationships to actually keep our physical being alive. We're one of the few, if not the only mammal that can't sustain life on its own. So as you've probably heard, we're wired to connect. We're interpersonal creatures. You might have heard humans described as, and that's the reason why we quite literally need others to sustain life. And then, of course, our physical needs being met translates into our emotional needs, where it's been studied that when we're in supportive groups, our perceived stress goes down. So now we have an emotional component of being in relationship. So from that place of need, we begin to make those adaptations that we've been talking about all along. We begin to compromise, to wear the masks, to begin to show up as the caretaker that we felt we needed to be to ensure that our core needs got met into childhood. Now, as soon as we enter school and we have peers available to us, we don't actually modify that relational pattern. We continue to repeat it. We become now the toddler, the child, right? The adolescent, the teenager that seems to always find themselves in that caretaking role, right? And then flash forward in time and we become the adult who is similarly doing the same. So we are so patterned, and what trauma bonds then are, again, are familiar. What are the ways that we are so comfortable with showing up in relationships because that's what we're used to? Though again, exploring the possibility that might not be serving our full self or allowing us to be in full self-expression.
Oh, I'm just over here giggling to myself because I'm the oldest of three girls, and like the quote unquote example older sister caretaker, and I am just that human in my adult life.
Yes. I'm the overachieving, child from as long as I can remember. My very endearing childhood, not really a nickname, but something that I heard thrown around a lot in my family was Christ child, could never do wrong, right? All of this languaging that I was hearing, that I was absorbing, and now I became the overachiever adult. So if I'm not succeeding with all the stuff that I now populate my life with in business, I still see that same patterning in my relationships, where I always try to achieve, to meet everyone's expectation of me, surpass it even. And at my core, if I'm honest, Kelly, disappointing others, not getting the A, not showing up as the best in whatever way is one of the most difficult emotions for me to tolerate still.
It's so amazing because that what your work does is really, it uncovers all of that. It just, these aha moments left and right, page after page. And I'm like, oh my gosh, again, just like mic drop.
I'm so
good.
happy. I'm so happy to hear that. It is truly from that, for some of us, that awareness is the first healing step. Because for a lot of us, we've carried so much shame. Right? We've experienced ourselves in these ways for so long, this stuckness, we do begin to entertain something being wrong with us as the narrative here. And it's just simply not. So for many of us, hearing the why, having those aha moments, piecing it all together could be the most healing aspect of this journey, releasing the shame. It is a process to even do that, though. If you're typically used to shaming yourself, you probably will still attempt to from that subconscious, right?
Yeah.
Though for a lot of us, that could be the relief that this journey warrants for each of us. Though then there also are the larger majority of us that still want to show up differently now, that have that insight, that have those aha moments, and that still do want to create change, perhaps in their bodies, perhaps in their emotions, probably even more so in their relationships.
Oh, it's so good. And I love that you just mentioned bodies, because we're running out of time today, but it's just, that connection with trauma and pain and having physical ailments is real. And you talk about the science to prove that elevated cortisol or adrenaline response, that fight or flight, it manifests itself. Your brain has the ability to create inflammation in your body. I mean, it's just the fact that that's even, in your book is proof that we're opening this holistic door, and people need to look at themselves and as a whole being.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Inflammation, stress, cortisol, even just from the reality that the realities, the cities we're living in, the structures of our societies, aren't comfortable for us as humans, are stressful in and of itself. The fact that I, can hear banging outside my door from God knows what is a lot for our nervous systems. We didn't, when we evolved in quiet on plains where there wasn't, city life and people living around each of us. It is challenging and it's stressful to be a human. And then of course, if you overlay that, just the general stress of living like many of us do, with the traumas, with the pain, with the structural inequalities in a lot of our governments and our systems and our societies, just exacerbate that. So I really love that you're, highlighting stress, cortisol, the work that you do, Kelly, around the body in and of itself. That is part of our story. And it will continue to be part of our story while we're here in human bodies. Again, so to help people truly understand themselves and heal, I believe that people like us have to continue to have these conversations, that the body has to be a part of it.
Absolutely. And you mentioned The Body Keeps the Score a number of times in this book. And it's also a book that I've recommended to clients because it's so interconnected.
Yeah.
It's so interconnected.
Yeah, Bessel and that book was so groundbreaking because it was one of the first, real works where we are documenting the effects of stress in particular and trauma in particular on the body. So anyone who hasn't read it, I definitely think, I know it's pretty heavy in the science side of things. I love science, so I happen to particularly like it, though I know that I have heard from some people that it does feel a bit, scientific. So again, my hope is that book, in addition to books like How to Do the Work, can break it down, some of those concepts, into the more practical. Again, I often say this, most of what I'm talking about isn't new. It's been talked about in different ways, in different fields and different modalities, really throughout time at this point. Though my hope is that the way that I talk about it each and every day, I talk about in the book, that for some of us, it resonates and allows that human to build that bridge from what for many of us was a concept, was maybe just something we read about in a book that seemed very elusive and didn't really understand what the practical application of that is. My hope is that more of us can begin to build that bridge from insight to action.
Well, I think you did exactly what you set out to do. I mean, I read The Body Keeps the Score after my first birth with my son, Sebastian, which was my first traumatic experience. He was put in an ambulance and taken across to town to Children's Hospital, Los Angeles. And, I saw traditional therapy after that, and they recommended that book. And I was like, great. So I'm just walking around with trauma in my body with no idea how to pull it out of my cells and to do the work. And what your book does is it does exactly what you wanted it to do. You built the bridge. You built the bridge between the understanding of the science and how trauma and childhood and our experiences can lay the groundwork of our response to life and our coping mechanisms and how we can change it. And that it is possible, that there is this light at the end of the tunnel, that each of us are this unique, beautiful, wonderful being, and we can have beautiful relationships, supportive and loving, and take care of ourselves. And we can see the light, we can be the light, and we can get there. Nicole, thank you so much for being here. I'm obsessed with you and your work. Thank you for being a type A overachiever who did all this for all of us.
I have chills, Callie. Seriously, I wish you could see you just saying that. I just have so many chills. Thank you for the work you're doing. Thank you for being curious and interested to have a conversation with me. My goal here, like I said, is always just to empower people to, I know how pivotal it was for me to have that door just creaked open, as I say. I didn't believe the possibility for myself when I began to read about some of this. I very much, thought and separated, well, for them is one thing, but definitely not for me. And I know that that's how us humans work, right? Wisdom is the greatest teacher. What wisdom means to me is life experience, doing the thing. So definitely don't take my word for it, though I couldn't agree more. We are all whole. We are all capable of healing. I think more people like you and I need to have these conversations where healing is a possibility. Likely listeners out there might not agree it to be a possibility for them, though I assure you, if you begin to just create change through one small promise, so much is available to each and every one of you. So thank you for your time. And again, thank you for the work you do in the world. The change is palpable. It's here, and we're making it happen.
Oh, so good. Well, where can people follow along? I'm sure they're all following, but where can they follow along?
Each
Where
and
can
every
they get the
day.
book?
Yeah, absolutely. You can come join me and all the other self-healers where it all began on the Instagram account at the.holistic.psychologist. For any YouTubers out there, we'll be rolling out season 2. Season 1 is already up on the YouTube channel. Give a search, The Holistic Psychologist, on there. Those of you interested in the future self journal prompts that we spoke about, the website is theholisticspsychologist.com. And super exciting news, in the next couple weeks, you'll be seeing and hearing a lot more from me on our new podcast, The Self Healer Soundboard. So coming to a podcast location near you, keep an eye out.